On Christmas Eve, my 7-year-old found a note from my parents. "We're off to Hawaii. Please move out by the time we're back." Her hands were shaking. I didn't shout. I took my phone and made a small change. They saw what I did and went pale. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this nightmare actually began, because the real story isn't about that note. It's about everything that led to it, and what I discovered when I finally stopped being the good daughter and started paying attention to the truth hiding in plain sight. My name is Adriana Castellano, and 3 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life. My husband died 2 years back in a boating accident off the coast of Newport, leaving me and our daughter Sophia with enough money to live comfortably but not extravagantly. That's when my parents, Richard and Victoria Castellano, swooped in with their signature blend of concern and control. They owned half of the commercial real estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, and they made it clear that moving into their estate was the only logical choice for a young widow and her child. I was grateful then. I actually cried when my father pulled me into his study and told me that family takes care of family, that their home was my home, that Sophia deserved stability. What I didn't realize was that I was signing away more than just my independence. I was walking straight into a trap that had been set long before my husband's boat ever left the harbor. The estate sat on 4 acres of manicured perfection, all stone facades and floor-to-ceiling windows that made you feel exposed even when you were inside. My parents occupied the main house, a sprawling colonial with more rooms than any 2 people could ever need. They'd converted the guest house into what they called my private quarters, which sounds generous until you realize it kept me close enough to summon, but far enough to ignore. Sophia loved it at first. She had a pool, a tennis court, horses in the stable that my mother kept for show. She had grandparents who spoiled her with gifts and private school tuition and writing lessons. She had everything except what she really needed, which was a mother who wasn't slowly disappearing under the weight of obligation and unspoken expectations. I started noticing the small things first, how my mother would correct the way I dressed Sophia, the way I spoke to the household staff, the way I organized my own kitchen, how my father would ask about my finances during family dinners, suggesting investments and opportunities that somehow always required me to sign documents I didn't fully understand. How they both had this way of making me feel like I owed them something beyond gratitude, like my presence in their home was a debt that could never quite be repaid. But I brushed it off, because that's what I'd been trained to do my entire life. Richard and Victoria Castellano didn't raise a daughter who questioned authority. They raised a daughter who smiled and complied and never, ever made waves. Then came the morning I found my mother in my bedroom, going through my dresser drawers. She didn't even look embarrassed when I walked in. She just held up a silk blouse I bought myself the week before and said, "This color washes you out, darling. I've always told you that jewel tones work better with your complexion." She wasn't looking for the blouse, though. I could see it in her eyes, the way they darted toward my nightstand, toward the drawer where I kept my personal documents. She was searching for something specific, and the blouse was just her cover story. "Num, what are you doing in here?" I kept my voice level, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I was looking for that bracelet I lent you last month, the diamond tennis bracelet. I want to wear it to the Vanderbilt gala next week." I'd returned that bracelet 6 weeks ago. She knew that. I knew she knew that. But we both stood there, in this theater of polite fiction, pretending that her violation of my privacy was really just a forgetful mother looking for her jewelry. That was the first time I felt it, that cold prickle of fear running down my spine. Something was very wrong in this house, and I was the only one who didn't seem to understand the rules of the game being played. 2 weeks later, I was having lunch with my childhood friend Isabel at a bistro in downtown Greenwich when she casually mentioned that she'd seen my father at a law office in Stamford. "I didn't know you guys were dealing with legal stuff," she said, twirling pasta around her fork. "Is everything okay?" "What law office?" I asked, trying to sound casual even though my stomach had just dropped. "Henderson and Associates. You know, the estate planning firm. My parents used them when my grandmother passed." She looked at me strangely. "Are your parents redoing their will or something?" I smiled and changed the subject, but my mind was racing. My parents' estate attorney was Gerald Whittemore, and he'd been handling their affairs for 30 years. They had no reason to be visiting a different firm, especially not one that specialized in trust litigation and estate disputes. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I went into my father's study while my parents were at their weekly dinner club meeting. The door was unlocked, which should have been my first warning that maybe this wasn't the brilliant detective work I thought it was, but I was desperate for answers. What I found made my blood turn to ice. There were folders, dozens of them, all meticulously organized in the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk. Files with my name on them, files about my late husband's estate, files containing financial statements I'd never seen before, property deeds, insurance documents, and worst of all, a legal petition dated 3 weeks earlier. A petition for guardianship. My parents were trying to have me declared mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs, and they were using my grief, my occasional anxiety, my completely normal struggles as a young widow as evidence that I needed their intervention. The petition cited everything from my erratic spending habits to my inability to maintain stable employment to my concerning emotional dependency on pharmaceutical remedies. Every word was a lie wrapped in just enough truth to sound plausible. Yes, I'd bought a new car after moving in with them, but it was a sensible SUV, not a sports car. Yes, I'd quit my job at the art gallery, but that was because they'd insisted Sophia needed me home after school. Yes, I occasionally took anxiety medication prescribed by my doctor, but that hardly made me incompetent. But none of that would matter if they could convince a judge that I was unstable. If they succeeded, they would control everything. My inheritance from my husband, Sophia's trust fund, every decision about her education, her health care, her future. They would own us completely, and there wouldn't be a thing I could do about it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the papers. I took photos of everything with my phone, my heart pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear it echoing through the empty house. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it, and walked out of that study knowing that my parents weren't trying to help me, they were trying to erase me. That's when I started watching them the way they'd been watching me. I paid attention to their phone calls, their meetings, their whispered conversations that stopped the moment I entered a room. I smiled and played the grateful daughter while I pieced together the truth they'd been hiding from me for months, maybe years. And what I discovered made that guardianship petition look like small potatoes. My father's real estate empire was crumbling. He'd over-leveraged himself on a development project in Fairfield County, betting that luxury condos would sell in a market that was already saturated. He'd borrowed against properties he didn't fully own, created shell companies to hide the debt, and now the whole house of cards was about to collapse. He needed cash, and he needed it fast. My husband's life insurance payout had been substantial, $2 million, held in a trust that I controlled. My father couldn't touch it directly, but if he could have me declared incompetent, he could appoint himself as trustee. He could drain that account to save his dying empire, and I would never even know until it was too late. But that still didn't explain the urgency, the almost desperate quality to their recent behavior. There had to be something else, something bigger that I was missing. I found it 3 days before Christmas, tucked inside a folder marked personal in my mother's home office. A private investigator's report about my late husband's death. Page after page of surveillance photos, witness statements, marine accident analysis. They'd hired someone to investigate the boating accident, and what the investigator found was explosive. My husband hadn't died in an accident. The boat had been sabotaged, the fuel line deliberately cut in a way that would cause an explosion once the engine reached a certain temperature. It was murder, plain and simple. And, according to the investigator's notes, the primary suspect was someone with financial motive and access to the boat. Someone like my father, who'd argued with my husband 2 weeks before his death on a business deal gone wrong. Someone like my father, who'd been seen at the marina the night before the accident. Someone like my father, who'd been the one to insist we stop pushing the police for answers and just accept that terrible things sometimes happen. I stood in my mother's office, holding proof that my father might have killed my husband, and I realized that the guardianship petition wasn't just about money. It was about covering up a murder. If they could control me, they could control the narrative. They could make sure I never asked the wrong questions, never pushed for the investigation to be reopened, never discovered that my daughter's father had been taken from her by the people who were now pretending to care for us. That's when I knew I had to do more than just escape. I had to make them pay. I spent the next 2 days preparing, moving money, making calls to attorneys my parents didn't know I'd contacted, setting up accounts they couldn't access. I was calm, methodical, cold in a way I'd never been before. I wasn't the grieving widow anymore. I wasn't the obedient daughter. I was a woman who'd finally seen the truth, and I was done being a victim in someone else's story. But I made one critical mistake. I underestimated how closely they were watching me, and I underestimated how far they were willing to go to maintain control. On Christmas Eve, Sophia came running into my room at 6 a.m, tears streaming down her face, holding a note she'd found slipped under our door. The handwriting was my mother's, elegant and cruel in equal measure. "We're off to Hawaii. Please move out by the time we're back." Just like that. No explanation, no conversation, no acknowledgement of everything we supposedly meant to each other. Just a command, delivered like I was nothing more than a tenant who'd overstayed her welcome.
Sophia was sobbing, asking me why Grandma and Grandpa didn't want us anymore, asking me what she'd done wrong. My beautiful, innocent daughter, who'd already lost her father, was now being abandoned by the people who'd promised to love her forever. And something inside me just snapped. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I walked calmly to my room, picked up my phone, and made a small change to something I'd set up 2 days earlier. One click, one transfer, one tiny adjustment to the digital framework I'd been building while they thought I was too stupid and too broken to fight back. Then I walked downstairs to where my parents were loading luggage into their Mercedes, getting ready to flee to their vacation home in Maui while I dealt with the humiliation of being thrown out of their house on Christmas. I didn't say a word. I just held up my phone and let them see the screen. My father went pale first, all the color draining from his face like someone had pulled a plug. My mother actually stumbled backward, her hand flying to her throat, because what they saw on that screen was a notification that every single document I'd found in my father's study, every piece of evidence about the guardianship petition and the private investigator's report, and my father's financial crimes, had just been forwarded to 3 very important people: the district attorney, the state attorney general, and the lead detective who'd originally investigated my husband's death before being told to close the case. "What did you do?" my father whispered, his voice hoarse with shock.
I made a small change, I said calmly. I scheduled those emails to send this morning if I didn't cancel them by midnight last night. But then I found your lovely note, and I decided your Christmas gift to me deserved a Christmas gift in return. My mother made a sound like she was choking. You don't understand what you've done. This will ruin everything. This will destroy the family. You destroyed this family the day you decided I was worth more to you as a puppet than as a daughter, I said. You destroyed this family the day Dad decided his business problems were more important than my husband's life. You destroyed this family the moment you thought you could throw me and Sophia away like we were nothing. But here's the thing about revenge. The moment you pull the trigger, there's no taking it back. And as I stood there watching my parents' carefully constructed world start to crumble, I realized that I still didn't know the full story. I didn't know why my mother had gone along with all of this. I didn't know what they'd promised each other, what secrets they were still keeping, what final card they might still have left to play. My father's phone rang, shattering the frozen silence. He answered it without taking his eyes off me, listened for a moment, then ended the call. That was Gerald, he said flatly. The DA's office just requested all files related to our family. They're opening a formal investigation. Good, I said. Then they'll find everything I found, and maybe this time someone will actually care that my husband was murdered. Murdered? My mother's voice was sharp, almost panicked. Adriana, what are you talking about? Your husband died in an accident. We all mourned him. We all— Stop lying! The words erupted out of me before I could control them. Sophia was still upstairs, and I didn't want her to hear this, but I couldn't hold it in anymore. I found the investigator's report, Mom. I know the boat was sabotaged. I know Dad was there the night before. I know everything. Something flickered across my father's face then. Something that looked almost like relief, which made absolutely no sense given the circumstances. You think I killed him, he said slowly. You actually think I murdered your husband? Didn't you? I was shaking now, all my careful control starting to fracture. No, he said, and the way he said it made my stomach drop. But I know who did. And that's when my mother started crying, these horrible, wrenching sobs that sounded like they were being torn out of her chest. That's when I realized that the guardianship petition and the financial crimes and even the sabotaged boat were all just pieces of a much bigger, much darker puzzle. That's when I understood that I'd been playing checkers while my parents were playing chess, and I'd just made a move that was going to expose secrets that maybe should have stayed buried. Mom? I took a step toward her, suddenly uncertain. Mom, what's going on? She looked up at me with eyes that were haunted, desperate, filled with something that looked like guilt and terror mixed together. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Adriana. We were trying to protect you. Everything we did to protect you. Protect me from what? My father pulled out his phone, pulled up a photo, and handed it to me with hands that were trembling. From this, he said quietly. From the truth about who your husband really was and what he did to our family before he died. I looked at the photo and the world tilted sideways. The photo showed my late husband, David, standing outside a bank in the Cayman Islands. He was smiling, his arm around a woman I'd never seen before, both of them looking tanned and happy and very much like a couple. The timestamp on the photo said it was taken 6 months before his death, during a trip he'd told me was a business conference in Chicago. I stared at that image until the pixels started to blur, my brain refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. "This doesn't prove anything," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "This could be anyone. This could be photoshopped." My father took the phone back and swiped to the next photo, then the next. David and this mystery woman having dinner at an expensive restaurant. David and this woman on a yacht. David and this woman entering a luxury condo with his hand on the small of her back. Dozens of photos taken over the course of what looked like months, documenting a relationship that had apparently been thriving while I was home with our daughter, believing every lie he told me about late meetings and business trips and overtime at the firm. "Her name is Natasha Volkov," my mother said quietly, wiping her eyes. "She's a financial consultant, or at least that's what she called herself when she was helping your husband drain his company's assets into offshore accounts." I felt like I was going to be sick. "What are you talking about?" My father gestured toward the house. "Can we please go inside? Your daughter doesn't need to see this, and we don't need the neighbors watching our family implode on the front lawn." I followed them into the main house on autopilot, my mind reeling. Sophia was still upstairs in the guest house, probably watching cartoons and trying to understand why her Christmas had turned into a nightmare. I needed to get back to her, but I also needed to understand what was happening. We sat in my father's study, the same room where I'd found all those documents, and this time my parents were the ones who looked like they'd been caught in a trap they couldn't escape. "David wasn't who you thought he was," my father began. "I know that sounds like something out of a bad movie, but it's the truth. About a year before he died, I started noticing irregularities in some joint investments we had together. Small amounts missing here and there, nothing that set off alarm bells immediately, but enough that I asked my accountant to take a closer look. What we found was a systematic embezzlement scheme that had been going on for at least 2 years. David had been stealing from his own company, from our shared ventures, from investment funds that belonged to his clients. We're talking millions of dollars, Adriana, millions." I sat there numb, unable to reconcile this version of David with the man I'd married, the man who'd held Sophia when she was born and cried with joy, the man who'd promised to love me forever. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because we didn't know how deep it went at first," my mother said. "We didn't know if you were involved. We didn't know if this Natasha woman was his partner or his mark. We hired the private investigator to follow him, to gather evidence, to figure out what he was planning. And what we discovered was that your husband was getting ready to disappear." My father pulled out another folder, this one containing financial documents and travel itineraries. He'd already moved most of the money. He'd already purchased a property in the Caymans under a shell company. He had plane tickets booked for himself and Natasha, one-way tickets scheduled for 3 weeks after his boat trip. He was going to fake his death, blame it on an accident, and leave you and Sophia with nothing, while he started a new life with his mistress and our money. The room was spinning. I gripped the arms of the chair so hard my knuckles turned white. "But he actually died. The boat actually exploded." "Yes," my father said, "and that's where this gets complicated." My mother took a shaky breath. "The investigator we hired got in contact with someone David had crossed in one of his business deals, a man who'd lost a substantial amount of money in one of David's schemes, a man who had connections to people who don't solve their problems through lawsuits and arbitration. This man told our investigator that David had made enemies, serious enemies, and that there were rumors David was planning to disappear before those enemies caught up with him. Our investigator reported all of this to us 3 days before David's boat trip. I could see where this was going, and I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want it to be true. But I sat there frozen as my mother continued, tears streaming down her face. Your father went to the marina to talk to David, to confront him about the money and the affair and the plan to abandon you. They argued. David laughed in your father's face, told him there was nothing we could do about it, that by the time anyone figured out what had happened, he'd be beyond reach. Your father left that boat intact, Adriana. I swear to you, he left that boat intact. But someone else didn't.
Who? My voice was barely a whisper. We don't know for certain, my father said, but the investigator believes it was someone associated with the people David had stolen from, someone who decided that if David was going to fake his death anyway, they might as well make it real. The sabotage was professional, clean, untraceable except to an expert who knew what to look for. The police ruled it an accident, and we didn't correct them because we were terrified that if the truth came out, you'd be implicated. David had been using your signature on some documents, Adriana. He'd been making it look like you were part of his schemes, probably as insurance in case anything went wrong. If we'd gone to the police with what we knew, you could have ended up under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, maybe even conspiracy to commit murder, depending on how the prosecutors wanted to spin it. I thought I was going to throw up. So you just covered it up? You let everyone think it was an accident and didn't tell me anything? We were trying to protect you, my mother said desperately. We were trying to protect Sophia. If the truth came out, the media would have destroyed you. David's victims would have come after you for restitution. You would have lost everything, including possibly custody of your daughter. We thought if we could just quietly fix the financial mess he'd left behind, if we could just keep you close where we could watch over you, we could spare you all of that pain. By trying to have me declared incompetent? I was shaking with rage now, all the pieces finally clicking into place. By trying to take control of the only money I had left? My father had the decency to look ashamed. That was my idea, and it was wrong. The financial situation got worse than we anticipated. David had done more damage than we realized, and some of his creditors started making noise about coming after his estate. I panicked. I thought if I could protect your assets under a guardianship, I could shield them from legal claims. I thought I could save what was left for Sophia's future. But I know how it looked. I know what you must have thought when you found those documents. You made me think I was crazy, I said, my voice breaking. You made me doubt myself every single day. You violated my privacy, controlled my choices, manipulated every aspect of my life, and you want me to believe it was all for my own good? It was wrong, my mother said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. We handled everything wrong. We should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. But we were scared, Adriana. Scared of losing you the way we lost David. Scared of what would happen to Sophia if you fell apart. Scared of our own failures as parents because we never saw what David really was until it was too late. I stood up, needed to move, needed air. The note this morning, the Hawaii trip, was that part of the plan too? My father shook his head. That was panic, pure and simple. We got word yesterday that one of David's former business associates was asking questions, trying to track down what happened to the missing money. We thought if we left for a while, let things cool down, we could figure out our next move. The note was your mother's idea. Don't blame me, my mother snapped at him. You're the one who said we needed to create distance, that we couldn't be seen as enabling her. Enabling me? I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Is that what you think you've been doing this whole time? They started arguing then, their perfect facade cracking completely as they turned on each other. 35 years of marriage, and it took one crisis to reveal how fragile their partnership really was. I watched them fight, these people who'd raised me, who'd shaped me, who'd apparently been lying to me for 2 solid years, and I felt nothing but a cold, empty clarity. "Stop!" I said. They kept arguing. "Stop!" I shouted at this time, and they both froze. I don't care whose idea was what. I don't care about your excuses or your justifications. You're right about one thing. David was a liar and a thief, and he was planning to destroy our family. But you know what? You actually succeeded where he failed. You destroyed us from the inside out while pretending to keep us safe. You made me a prisoner in my own life. You traumatized my daughter on Christmas morning. And you did it all while convinced you were the heroes of this story. "Adriana, please," my mother started. "No," I cut her off. "I'm done listening. Here's what's going to happen now. Those emails I sent, they included everything I found about Dad's financial crimes, but they also included a detailed statement from me about how I discovered all of this, how I had no knowledge of David's activities, and how I've been cooperating with my own investigation into his affairs. I've been working with an attorney for the past week, one who specializes in financial fraud and victim advocacy. She's already filed motions to freeze the guardianship petition and to open an investigation into how you've been handling my finances." My father went pale again. "You can't do this to us. We're your parents." "You should have thought about that before you decided to treat me like a problem that needed to be managed, instead of a person who deserved the truth." I pulled out my phone and showed them screenshots of bank transfers. "I've also moved every penny of my money into accounts you can't access. Sophia's trust fund, my inheritance, everything. It's all protected now, and you can't touch it." "Where will you go?" my mother asked, and she actually sounded worried, which would have been touching if it wasn't 2 years too late. "That's not your concern anymore," I said. "But since it's Christmas, I'll tell you this much. I bought a house 3 weeks ago, a small place in Westport, right on the water. I've been furnishing it, preparing it, getting everything ready for the moment I could finally leave this prison you built for me. Sophia and I are moving today, and you're not going to stop us." My mother started crying again. "Please don't take Sophia away from us. She's our granddaughter. We love her." "You should have loved her enough to be honest with her mother. You should have loved her enough to put her needs ahead of your pride and your panic, but you didn't. So now you get to live with the consequences." I turned to leave, then stopped. There was one more thing I needed to know. The district attorney will find all the evidence I sent them. They'll investigate Dad's finances and David's death and everything in between. But I need to know right now, on whatever shred of honor you have left, did you have anything to do with sabotaging that boat? My father met my eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw something that looked like genuine emotion on his face. "No, I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, I did not kill your husband. I wanted to." When I found out what he was planning, when I understood that he was going to destroy my daughter and abandon my granddaughter, I wanted him gone, but I didn't do it. And I spent 2 years trying to find out who did so I could either turn them in or thank them, depending on my mood that day. "That's not funny," I said. "It's not meant to be," he replied. "It's just the truth. Your husband was a monster who wore a good man's face, and someone did the world a favor by removing him from it. I'm not sorry he's dead, Adriana. I'm only sorry you had to love him first." I left them sitting in that study, 2 powerful people who'd lost everything that mattered because they'd forgotten that control isn't the same thing as love. I went back to the guest house, packed up Sophia's favorite things, and sat her down to have the hardest conversation of my life. I didn't tell her everything. She was 7, and she deserved to keep whatever innocence she had left. But I told her enough.
I told her that Grandma and Grandpa had made some mistakes, that sometimes grown-ups do the wrong thing even when they think they're helping, and that we were going to stay somewhere new for a while. "Is it because of the note?" she asked, her eyes still red from crying. "Partly," I said, "but mostly it's because Mommy realized we need a fresh start, somewhere that's just ours. I found us a house, baby girl, a beautiful house where you can see the ocean from your bedroom window. Would you like that?" She nodded slowly. "Will Grandma and Grandpa visit?" "Maybe someday," I said, not wanting to lie, but not ready to tell her the full truth either. "But right now, it's going to be just you and me. Is that okay?" She threw her arms around my neck. "As long as I have you, Mommy, everything's okay." We left that afternoon, pulling out of the estate gates while my parents watched from the front steps. My mother tried to wave, but I didn't wave back. Some bridges burn for a reason, and you don't rebuild them just because someone's sorry they got caught. The house in Westport was everything I'd promised Sophia. It was smaller than my parents' estate, more modest than the home I'd shared with David, but it was ours, really, truly ours, paid for with my own money and decorated according to my own taste, and filled with only the memories we chose to create. Sophia loved her ocean view bedroom, loved the small garden where we could plant flowers, loved the sense of possibility that came with starting over somewhere new. But starting over meant dealing with the fallout from everything I'd set in motion. The district attorney's investigation moved faster than I'd anticipated. Within 2 weeks, they'd confirmed most of what I'd found: my father's financial irregularities, the questionable business practices, the attempts to manipulate my assets. They also reopened the investigation into David's death 2 years ago, bringing in maritime experts and forensic accountants and a whole team of people dedicated to figuring out what had really happened on that boat 2 years ago. What they found validated everything my parents had told me and added a few twists they'd left out. David had indeed been planning to disappear. He'd also been planning to frame me for his financial crimes, planting evidence that would make it look like I'd been his willing accomplice. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, the falsified documents, all of it pointed back to me in ways that would have been nearly impossible to disprove without the kind of resources I didn't have. If David had succeeded in faking his death, I would have been arrested within weeks. I would have lost Sophia. I would have spent years fighting charges I couldn't beat because my husband had been that thorough in his betrayal. As for who actually killed him, the investigation hit a wall. The boat had been destroyed too completely to yield definitive forensic evidence. The suspects were numerous. David had apparently made enemies across 3 continents with his financial schemes, but none of them could be definitively linked to the sabotage. In the end, the DA's office ruled it a homicide by person or persons unknown, which meant David's death would remain officially unsolved. Part of me hated that lack of closure. Part of me was relieved. Whoever had cut that fuel line had saved me from a fate worse than widowhood, and I wasn't sure I wanted them caught. My father avoided criminal charges through a combination of expensive lawyers and carefully worded settlements. He paid substantial fines, made restitution to the people he'd defrauded, and agreed to step down from his position at his real estate company. His empire didn't crumble completely, but it shrank considerably, and his reputation in Greenwich social circles never recovered. My mother stood by him through it all, but their marriage became one of those hollow arrangements you see in old money families. 2 people living parallel lives under the same roof because divorce would be too expensive and too embarrassing. They reached out several times in those first few months, trying to rebuild bridges I'd burned. My mother sent gifts for Sophia, expensive toys and clothes that I donated to charity. My father sent letters explaining himself, justifying himself, asking for another chance to prove he could be the parent I deserved. I read the letters, acknowledged them, and then filed them away in a box I kept in the back of my closet. Maybe someday I'd be ready to forgive them. Maybe someday Sophia would want to know her grandparents again. But that day wasn't today, and it wouldn't be tomorrow. As for me, I started therapy, real therapy, with a woman who specialized in trauma and betrayal and helping people rebuild their sense of self after systematic manipulation. It was hard work, excavating all the layers of lies I'd been living under, but it was necessary. I learned that my parents' control hadn't started when I moved into their estate. It had been there my whole life, subtle and insidious, shaping me into someone who valued compliance over authenticity. I learned that I'd chosen David partly because he fit the mold of what my parents wanted for me, successful and charming, and good at playing the game they'd taught me to play. I learned that breaking free meant more than just moving out of their house. It meant reconstructing my entire understanding of who I was and who I wanted to be. I also went back to work. The art gallery that had employed me before didn't have an opening, but they connected me with a smaller gallery in Westport that was looking for someone with my background. The pay was modest, but I didn't need much. I had enough money to support Sophia and myself comfortably, and I discovered that I preferred modest anyway. I preferred earning my own way, making my own choices, building a life that reflected my values rather than someone else's expectations. Sophia adjusted better than I'd feared. She made new friends at her new school, joined a soccer team, started taking art classes that she actually enjoyed instead of the piano lessons my mother had insisted on. She asked about her grandparents sometimes, usually around holidays or birthdays, and I answered her questions honestly, without poisoning her against them. That was the trickiest part of this whole thing, honoring my own boundaries while not destroying Sophia's image of the grandparents who had, despite everything, loved her in their own broken way. 6 months after we left the estate, I got a call from the victim advocacy attorney who'd helped me protect my assets. She'd been contacted by the FBI. Apparently, David's financial crimes had intersected with a larger investigation into international money laundering, and they needed my cooperation as a witness. I spent the better part of a year working with federal investigators, providing documents and testimony and everything I could remember about David's business dealings. It was exhausting and occasionally terrifying, but it was also empowering. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was someone who'd survived, who'd fought back, who'd chosen truth over comfort, even when truth was painful. The investigation ultimately led to the arrest of 17 people involved in the money laundering scheme, including Natasha Volkov, David's mistress and apparent criminal mastermind. Turned out, she wasn't just helping him steal money, she was using him to funnel dirty cash through his legitimate business operations. David had been her mark just as much as I'd been his. The FBI recovered about 40% of the stolen funds, which was better than anyone had expected. I didn't get any of that money back. It belonged to David's victims, people who'd trusted him with their investments and their futures. But I did get the satisfaction of knowing that the people who'd destroyed my life were facing consequences. Through all of this, Sophia and I built something new. We developed routines that were just ours. Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon walks on the beach, weeknight dinners where we actually talked to each other instead of performing for an audience. I taught her that trust has to be earned, that love without honesty is just manipulation wearing a prettier mask, that family is supposed to make you feel safe, not controlled. I showed her, through my actions more than my words, that you can survive betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. On the first anniversary of the day we left my parents' estate, Sophia and I had a private celebration. We baked a cake, lit a candle, and I let her make a wish. "What did you wish for?" I asked, knowing she probably wouldn't tell me because wishing rules are sacred when you're 8. But she surprised me. "I wished that you'd stay happy, Mommy, because you smile for real now, not that fake smile you used to do at Grandma and Grandpa's house. I like your real smile better." I hadn't realized she'd noticed the difference. I hadn't realized how much of my pain I'd been carrying where my daughter could see it. But kids notice everything, don't they? They see the truth even when we're trying to hide it. I pulled her close and promised her that I would do everything in my power to keep smiling for real, to keep choosing authenticity over appearances, to keep building a life worth celebrating. That promise led me to my final act of closure. I wrote my parents a letter, the kind of letter I'd been drafting in my head for months, but had never been brave enough to actually send. I told them that I forgave them for being human, for making mistakes, for loving me in the only way they knew how. But I also told them that forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, that I could acknowledge their pain while still protecting myself from their patterns. I told them that if they wanted a relationship with me or with Sophia, it would have to be on my terms, with honesty, with boundaries, with respect for my autonomy. I told them that I hoped they could understand, but that I would survive if they couldn't. My mother responded first, with a letter of her own that was surprisingly self-aware. She acknowledged the damage they'd done, the control they'd wielded, the fear that had driven all their worst choices. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. She just thanked me for my honesty and told me that she was proud of the woman I'd become, even if she'd had very little to do with it. It was the most genuine communication we'd had in my entire life, and it gave me hope that maybe, eventually, we could find some version of peace. My father's response was more complicated. He wanted to fix things, to make deals, to negotiate terms for how we could move forward. It took 3 more letters and a very frank phone call before he understood that this wasn't something he could fix through force of will or financial leverage. Some things, I told him, you just have to accept. Some relationships, you just have to grieve. He didn't like that answer, but he eventually stopped pushing. 2 years after that Christmas Eve note changed everything, Sophia and I were thriving. Our little house in Westport had become a home in the truest sense, filled with laughter and art and the kind of comfortable chaos that comes from actually living, instead of just performing. I'd been promoted at the gallery, started dating again in a casual way that didn't terrify me, reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage to David. Sophia had grown into a confident, curious kid who asked hard questions and didn't accept easy answers, who knew that she was loved unconditionally but also knew that love meant honesty. We had dinner with my parents occasionally, carefully orchestrated meetings at neutral locations where everyone was on their best behavior. They were getting older, softer, more aware of what they'd lost when they chose control over trust. They doted on Sophia in those brief visits, and she enjoyed their attention in the uncomplicated way children can when they're secure in their primary attachments. I watched these interactions with a mixture of sadness and acceptance, mourning the family we could have been while appreciating the family we'd managed to salvage from the wreckage. The person I thought about most, though, was David, not with longing or grief, but with a kind of distant curiosity. Who had he really been underneath all those lies? Had he ever actually loved me, or had I been nothing but a useful facade for his criminal enterprise? Did he think about Sophia when he was planning to abandon us, or had he rationalized that away the same way he rationalized stealing from people who trusted him? I would never know the answers to these questions, and I'd made peace with that uncertainty. Some mysteries don't need to be solved. Some ghosts don't need to be understood. Sometimes it's enough to know that you survived them. What I knew for certain was this: that Christmas Eve note had been meant to break me, to reduce me to the helpless daughter who needed her parents to make all her decisions. Instead, it had freed me. It had forced me to see the truth I'd been avoiding, to claim the power I'd been surrendering, to choose the life I actually wanted instead of the life everyone else thought I should have. My parents had tried to control me out of fear and ultimately lost me because of it. David had tried to use me and ended up saving me through the very cruelty of his intentions.
And I had taken all of that pain and betrayal and transformed it into something better, a life built on honesty, a relationship with my daughter built on trust, a sense of self built on the hard-won knowledge that I was stronger than anyone had given me credit for. On Christmas Eve, exactly 3 years after everything changed, Sophia and I started a new tradition. We wrote down the biggest lie we'd believed about ourselves that year, and then we burned those pieces of paper in our fireplace while making s'mores and talking about the truth we'd discovered instead. That first year, my lie was, I need someone else to take care of me. My truth was, I am capable of building the life I deserve. Sophia's lie was, I have to make everyone happy. Her truth was, I can be kind without being responsible for other people's feelings. We watched those papers burn, turning lies into ash and smoke, and then we ate chocolate and marshmallows and talked about our hopes for the year ahead. It was simple, maybe even silly, but it was ours. And after everything we'd survived, after all the complicated truths and painful revelations, simple and silly and ours felt like exactly enough. That's the thing about revenge, I'd learned. The best kind isn't loud or destructive. It's not about hurting the people who hurt you. The best revenge is building something beautiful out of the ruins they left behind, something they can see but can never touch, something that proves they didn't break you after all. My parents lost their daughter but gained the knowledge that she was strong enough to survive without them. David tried to destroy me and instead taught me exactly how resilient I could be. And I got to watch my daughter grow up knowing that she came from a woman who chose truth over comfort, honesty over security, freedom over the illusion of safety. So yes, I made a small change that Christmas morning. I pulled a trigger that couldn't be unpulled. But that small change led to this larger transformation, this better life, this version of myself that I actually recognized when I looked in the mirror. And if I had to do it all over again, knowing everything I know now about pain and loss and the complicated nature of family loyalty, I would make that same choice in a heartbeat. Because some prices are worth paying, and some cages, no matter how gilded, are meant to be escaped. Before you scroll on, share where you're watching from in the comments. Your time and support truly mean everything. I'll be back soon with another story. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, and keep shining.